Echo Platoon, air support is 5 mics out. I repeat, move to the secondary rendezvous point now.
You are about to learn facts that will change your perception of World War II. We will talk about 5 inventions from World War II that no one remembers today. World War II was not only an era of great tank battles and air armadas, it was also a quiet, daily war waged by millions of soldiers against circumstances that were almost incompatible with life. In this struggle against cold, mud, isolation, and fear, remarkable ingenuity was born, turning everyday objects into tools for survival. It was engineering born of desperation and hope. We are used to seeing heroism in attacks on our screens, but we often forget about the heroism of everyday life, about the quiet victory of ingenuity over the entropy of war. These simple devices, invented in trenches, dugouts, and on the decks of sinking ships, did not change the course of major operations, but they saved thousands of lives, allowing people to remain human in inhuman conditions. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple piece of silk could save a pilot's life, and why a handheld radio that saved hundreds of lives was shaped like a woman's waist. What if I told you that everything you believed about trench warfare was wrong? We imagine it as a series of fierce attacks, but most of the time it was not a war of movement, but a war of paralyzing observation. The silence on the front lines was often deceptive, and the main rule of survival was to remain invisible. The front line was a complex maze of trenches, and the enemy was only a few dozen meters away. Raising your head above the parapet of the trench for even a few seconds meant putting yourself at mortal risk. The enemy's positions were monitored around the clock by observers and snipers who were waiting for just such a mistake. Any careless movement could be their last, so the soldiers were forced to literally grow into the ground. They lived under constant pressure from an invisible threat. However, observation was vital for conducting combat operations. Commanders needed to know what was happening on the enemy's side, whether they were preparing an attack, strengthening their positions, or moving forces. Without this information, the unit was blind and vulnerable. Obtaining intelligence became an extremely difficult task requiring tremendous endurance. This constant tension caused psychological fatigue that was no less exhausting than physical fatigue. Soldiers spent days and nights listening to the silence and trying to guess the enemy's intentions. The need to see without being seen became the main tactical task for everyone sitting in the trenches. The first attempts to solve this problem were primitive. Soldiers tried to use ordinary pocket mirrors to examine the neutral strip, holding them on a bayonet or stick. However, this method provided a very limited and distorted view. It was almost impossible to hold a small mirror at the right angle. It became clear that a special device was needed, one that was simple, reliable, and most importantly, affordable for mass production. It had to allow observation from behind cover without putting the observer's life at risk. Thus, the idea of the trench periscope was born, simple like all genius ideas. This was the first rule of survival. Don't stick your head out. What other unwritten rules do you think existed in the trenches? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our research. Guess how long it took a soldier to create this vital device? The answer will shock you. With the necessary materials, the simplest periscope could be assembled in less than an hour. The mirrors themselves were the most valuable part. Ordinary pocket mirrors, which soldiers brought from home or received in parcels, were often used. The body was usually made of wood, as it was easy to work with. Soldiers knocked together a long, narrow box, inside which mirrors were attached at the required angle. Sometimes the design was made collapsible for ease of transport. Each device was unique, but performed the same function. British soldiers often made so-called box periscopes. They took two identical tin cans, cut holes in them, and connected them with wooden slats. This design was lightweight and fairly sturdy. Soviet soldiers also showed remarkable ingenuity. They used any materials at hand, including cardboard and even birch bark, if they were in a wooded area. The main thing was to fix the mirrors firmly so that the image did not shake or distort. German soldiers, known for their methodical approach, often received factory-made, standardized periscope models. However, in field conditions, when standard equipment was lost, they made replacements from improvised materials in exactly the same way. War quickly made everyone equal in ingenuity. Of course, such homemade devices had their drawbacks. They provided a very narrow viewing angle, and the image was often dim. But this was incomparably better than a complete lack of information or unjustified risk. These devices became so widespread that they became part of soldiers' everyday life. A veteran who had gone through trench warfare could no longer imagine the front line without this simple eye on a stick. It became as indispensable an attribute as a mess tin or a rifle. But what if the danger came not from the ground, but from the sky, and you found yourself alone in the middle of the endless ocean? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of the device that saved pilots in icy water and was nicknamed Gibson Girl. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the pilots of that time. It was not a bomb or a gun, but an item that gave them a chance at a second life. We are talking about a unique invention, the SCR-578 emergency radio, known among pilots as the Gibson Girl. This device is a striking example of engineering focused solely on survival. The problem was tragically simple. During the Battle of the Atlantic and the Pacific campaigns, thousands of pilots and bomber crew members found themselves in the water after their planes were shot down. They were alone in a rubber dinghy in the middle of the ocean, without communication and with almost no hope of rescue. Finding a small boat in the vast ocean was like finding a needle in a haystack. Early emergency radios were ineffective. They had a weak signal, ran on batteries that quickly ran out in the cold, and required the operator to know Morse code. Survivors, in a state of shock and hypothermia, were often simply unable to use them.
This is Guardian 6. Does anyone copy?
A device was needed that was completely foolproof. It had to be waterproof, buoyant, and capable of generating a powerful signal without external power sources. Most importantly, it had to be usable by anyone, even without special training. This is how the SCR-578, developed jointly by British and American engineers, was born. It was a sturdy yellow box that was stored in aircraft along with life rafts. Its shape was its main feature. The radio had distinctive curves reminiscent of a female figure. The nickname Gibson Girl came from illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, who drew the popular Gibson Girls with their slim waists. The shape of the radio was not a design flourish. It was designed to be easily clamped between the knees in a cramped inflatable boat. The device was ingenious in its simplicity and reliability. It was completely waterproof and painted bright yellow for better visibility. The kit included not only the transmitter, but also everything necessary for it to work in the most extreme conditions. What if I showed you a time machine? For many pilots, the Gibson Girl radio was just that, transporting a person from despair to rescue. But how did it work without batteries, which would inevitably fail in salt water or freezing temperatures? The genius of the design lay in the hand generator. There was a special handle on the body of the device. The survivor simply had to turn it at a certain speed. This activated a built-in dynamo that generated enough electricity to power the transmitter. No batteries were needed, only human physical effort. Moreover, the operator did not need to know Morse code. The radio had two modes of operation. One mode allowed the signal to be tapped manually using a telegraph key. The second, and most important, was automatic. When switched to automatic mode, The device itself began to transmit the international distress signal SOS on the emergency frequency of 500 kHz. All that was required of the pilot was to continuously turn the handle. Any member of the crew could do this in turn, keeping the signal on the air for hours. But a powerful signal required a good antenna, and there was nowhere to install one in a rubber boat. The engineers had thought of this too, offering two solutions. The first was a compact kite that could be launched into the sky on a thin wire that served as an antenna. If the weather was calm, the kit included a small balloon. It was inflated using a canister of compressed hydrogen. The balloon lifted the antenna wire to a height sufficient for the signal to travel hundreds of kilometers. The radio station transmitted the signal not only on the standard emergency frequency, but also on the high-frequency band. This allowed not only ships, but also rescue planes to locate the boat, which significantly sped up the search. The winters on the Eastern Front in 1941 and 1942 became a real test of survival. Soldiers from both armies found themselves in conditions for which their standard equipment was completely unsuitable. Frost and snow became as merciless an enemy as enemy bullets. One of the most unexpected and insidious dangers was snow blindness. Endless, sun-drenched, snowy glades acted like a giant mirror. The bright light reflected from the snow caused severe eye irritation, and with prolonged exposure, led to temporary loss of vision. Soldiers who encountered this phenomenon described it as white darkness. Their eyes hurt unbearably, watered, and they became virtually helpless. They could neither fight, nor navigate the terrain, nor even take care of themselves. Standard Army regulations did not anticipate such a problem. The standard infantryman's equipment did not include sunglasses. This seemingly minor detail became a critical vulnerability in the snowy winter conditions. The command quickly realized the problem, but it was impossible to organize mass deliveries of special glasses to the front. The solution, as was often the case, came from below. Soldiers began to recall their grandfathers' almost primitive methods of protecting their eyes. They began to make improvised goggles using the experience of northern peoples. These devices were ingenious in their simplicity. They did not require complex materials or technologies. They could be made literally from whatever was lying underfoot. Pieces of bark, wood, leather from boots, or even thick cardboard were used. Two very narrow horizontal slits for the eyes were cut into the blank. This design sharply limited the amount of light reaching the retina, but still provided sufficient visibility. What I am about to show you seems primitive today, but at the time it saved eyesight and lives. Improvised snow goggles became widespread. Soviet soldiers often used birch bark to make them, as it was readily available and easy to work with. German soldiers used cardboard from packaging or wood. The slits in these goggles were made as narrow as possible. This not only protected against blinding light, but also reduced the freezing of eyelashes in severe frost. The device was attached to the head with string, a piece of wire, or bandage. Some craftsmen went further. They found broken colored glass, for example, from bottles, and inserted it into wooden or cardboard frames. This was almost a factory-made product, which was highly valued on the front lines. At the same time, the problem of camouflage was being solved. The simplest and most common solution was ordinary civilian sheets. In frontline villages, soldiers requisitioned or exchanged white fabric from the population. This fabric was used to sew primitive camouflage robes. Often it was just a piece of cloth with a slit for the head. Despite its simplicity, such a mask robe made a soldier almost invisible in the snow, especially at medium and long distances. Scouts and snipers approached the issue more carefully. They created full-fledged camouflage suits that covered the entire body and equipment. Sometimes white patches were sewn on top of the fabric to break up the silhouette and make it even more inconspicuous. Vehicles also had to be camouflaged. Tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were covered with whitewash. They used ordinary lime or white paint, if they could get it. This simple measure significantly reduced the visibility of vehicles from the air. War is, first and foremost, logistics, and food is at the heart of logistics. Soldiers must be well fed in order to fight. For the US Army, one of the symbols of supply was the famous K ration, developed by physiologist Ansel Keys. It was a compact and high-calorie meal designed for paratroopers and other mobile units. The ration was designed as a complete daily diet, divided into 3 small cardboard boxes: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Each box was coated with wax to protect it from moisture and had its own color and letter designation. The contents were carefully selected to provide maximum calories at minimum weight. The ration included canned food, meat or cheese, biscuits, instant coffee or broth, sugar, chocolate or caramel, and even cigarettes. It was the pinnacle of food technology at the time. However, the ration had one major problem. It was designed to be eaten cold. All the food was ready to eat straight from the can. But in the conditions of the European theater of war, especially in the cold and wet months, soldiers desperately needed hot food. Cold canned meat with congealed fat and rock-hard biscuits did not inspire enthusiasm. Morale and combat effectiveness depended directly on the possibility of getting at least a mug of hot coffee or a plate of warm food. But lighting fires on the front lines was often prohibited. Soldiers began to show ingenuity in order to heat up their rations. The waxed cardboard box from the ration itself was often used as fuel. It burned hot enough and long enough to boil water in a metal mug. This was risky, as even a small flame could give away their position. They needed a way to get heat without fire, and that way was found right at hand in the form of the engine of their own transport. The soldiers quickly discovered that the engines of Willys jeeps, trucks, and even Sherman tanks heated up significantly during operation. This seemingly side effect began to be used for domestic purposes. Cans of rations were tied to the engine's exhaust manifold. After 15 to 20 minutes of driving, the contents of the can were heated to the desired temperature. It was a simple, quick, and most importantly, safe field kitchen. This practice became so widespread that it entered soldier folklore. Jeep drivers were considered real lucky ones, as they always had access to a stove. They heated up rations not only for themselves, but for the entire unit. The soldiers' ingenuity knew no bounds. Simply heating up cans on the manifold was just the beginning. The soldiers began to create more complex recipes, mixing the contents of different rations to make something more edible. For example, they mixed crushed crackers with canned meat and heated it up to make a kind of thick stew. Instant coffee, which was included in every ration, became a real currency and the main means of boosting morale. The opportunity to drink hot coffee before dawn in a cold trench was priceless. It was heated in metal mugs over homemade stoves. Empty tin cans from the same rations were often used to make these stoves. Holes were punched in the can for air to flow in, and a rag soaked in gasoline or dry wood chips was placed inside. It was a miniature version of a trench candle that provided enough heat. American soldiers also invented a flask stove. They took a standard army mug, which was inserted into a flask. They poured a little gasoline into the mug directly from a Jeep canister and lit it. This flame could be used to quickly boil water. This method was dangerous but very fast. It required skill to prevent the flame from spreading to the canister or clothing. But in war, risk was a constant companion, and soldiers were willing to do anything for a hot meal. The soldiers' daily life was filled with such little tricks. They learned to use every piece of their equipment for purposes other than its intended use. For example, a helmet could serve not only as protection, but also as a bowl for washing, a pot for cooking, or even a shovel in soft ground. These life hacks were not written down in any regulations. They were passed on by word of mouth, from veterans to recruits. They formed a special soldier subculture based on experience and mutual support. The ability to organize one's life in the field was as important a skill as the ability to shoot. A soldier who could get hot food and provide himself with relative comfort was more resilient and psychologically stable. After the war, rations changed, and car engines became too complex and enclosed to be used for cooking. These soldier recipes and kitchen tricks became a thing of the past, remaining only in the pages of memoirs. Food was fuel for the body, but there was a material that became a universal tool, clothing, and even a medical remedy for soldiers. It was silk, from which parachutes were made. Parachutes were an integral part of warfare, especially with the development of airborne troops and strategic aviation. Thousands of pilots and paratroopers relied on them in critical situations. But once a parachute had served its primary function, its material became one of the most valuable and versatile resources on Earth. Initially, parachutes were made from natural silk. It was an incredibly durable, lightweight, and elastic material. It did not rot, dried quickly, and was pleasant to the touch. Later, with the development of the chemical industry, expensive silk was replaced by nylon, which had similar and, in some ways, even better characteristics. For soldiers on the ground, the canopy of a downed aircraft or a used paratrooper's parachute was a real treasure. Dozens of square meters of this high-tech fabric were immediately put to use. Not a single centimeter of material went to waste. The most valuable resource was the slings. Thin but incredibly strong nylon cords, known today as paracord or 550 cord, could withstand enormous loads. Soldiers unraveled the slings into strands, obtaining kilometers of the strongest thread. These threads were used for everything. They repaired equipment, shoes, and clothing. They wove knife straps from them and used them as shoelaces that never broke. Slings were used to set up tents, tension lines, and even as improvised fishing lines. The canopy material itself also had hundreds of uses. Pilots, especially in the hot climate of Burma or the Pacific Ocean, would first cut off a piece of silk and tie it around their necks. This scarf protected them from the sun and prevented their collars from rubbing against their skin. White silk was the perfect material for winter camouflage, as we have already mentioned. Its lightweight and durability were much more practical than heavy sheets. Soldiers sewed camouflage coats and helmet covers from it.
This silk is strong.
The versatility of parachute silk and nylon was astonishing. Soldiers quickly realized that this material could be used in the most unexpected areas, including medicine. In conditions where sterile bandages were in short supply, a clean piece of silk could serve as a temporary bandage. Unlike cotton, the smooth surface of silk and nylon stuck less to damaged areas, which made further treatment easier. Of course, this was not a sterile solution, but in the field, the choice was often between an improvised bandage and no bandage at all. Thin strands from parachute cords also found use in field medicine. In extreme cases, they could be used to sew up equipment or even for rough field surgery after being sterilized. Another important use for silk was in the manufacture of maps. Paper maps were extremely impractical. They tore, got wet in the rain, and made a telltale rustling sound. This was a serious problem for scouts and pilots. The Allied command began printing strategic maps for special forces and aircraft crews directly on silk. Such a map could not be torn, was not affected by water, and could be silently crumpled in a fist. It was a simple and ingenious solution. Soldiers used pieces of fabric to clean their weapons. Silk was perfect for wiping barrels and mechanisms without leaving lint behind, unlike cotton. Experienced fighters always carried small squares of silk in their bags. We have considered only a small part of the inventions that were born in the trenches, in aircraft cockpits, and on ship decks. trench periscopes, Gibson Girl, improvised snow goggles, soldier kitchens, and hundreds of uses for parachute silk. These are not just life hacks. They are evidence of an unyielding will to live. These stories show the other, less glamorous side of war. They demonstrate that behind every great battle, there were millions of small, personal struggles. In these struggles, soldiers relied not only on orders and standard weapons, but also on their own heads and hands. What other forgotten inventions or soldier tricks from that war do you know about? Perhaps you have heard stories from your grandfathers or great-grandfathers. Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.